What did I read last week? Do-do-do-do, do-do-do-do. What did Comics Kid 2099 read last week? Last week I read several books. The first one that I read was The Superior Foes of Spider-Man, all 17 issues in a nice sturdy hardcover volume. I know I talked about the first trade paperback volume of this series a couple of years ago, and I might have talked about volume 2 also, I don't remember, but I did not have volume 3, and I decided to go ahead and trade those two trade paperbacks in for store credit, and I bought the entire series in hardcover because for some reason my trade paperback for volume 1, the cover was starting to curve backwards, and I didn't want to have a trade paperback that was in kind of rough shape for a series that I love so much. If you watched my video review for volume 1, you know that I really love this series, and I wanted to have the entire series in one book that was in a little bit nicer shape than those trade paperbacks were. And my opinion has not changed of this series. It is awesome. If you like humor in your superhero comics, or in this case, a supervillain comic, then you have to read this. What I said whenever I reviewed Volume 1 was that this is kind of a modern version of the Justice League International series by J.M. DeMatteis and Kevin Maguire and Keith Giffen, and I stand by that. The humor here reminds me a lot of how that series was trying to be a sitcom first and foremost and a superhero comic second, and this is a lot like that. I really love most of the characters here. There's one or two of them that don't really come alive for me, but by and large, I really like the characters here. This makes me much more interested in several of these characters who are D-list villains who are probably not going to show up again for several more years. I was looking up a couple of them on Wikipedia, and there's at least two of them who don't show up again after Superior Foes of Spider-Man, so it's probably going to be a long time before some of these characters show up again, but I really love the way these characters are presented here. I don't think there is a single issue of this series that is a disappointment. Every page delivers a laugh of some kind. It is an absolute treat. If you like well-told comics that happen to make you laugh, you absolutely need to read this series. And Nick Spencer, he has gotten a little bit of crap in the last year or two for Secret Empire, which was Marvel's latest big event where Captain America is turned into a Nazi by the Red Skull via some brainwashing and altering history with the comics, the Cosmic Cube, and he got some crap for that, and I would say somewhat rightly so. Turning Captain America into a Nazi, not great. The way that they did it, also not great, and then people like Tom Brevoort getting out there and saying that no, this is not an alternate reality, this is the real Captain America, and then it turns out it actually kind of is an alternate reality, and it is brainwashing even though they said it wasn't. All that stuff led to some just really awkward stuff all around. I didn't actually read Secret Empire, but a lot of people were really getting on Nick Spencer's case, and he certainly wasn't helping matters by getting on social media and kind of fighting back a little bit against the people who were yelling at him. So a lot of people probably aren't in the mood to read Nick Spencer comics anymore, but I will say that Superior Foes of Spider-Man is really good, and this proves that he is capable of being a good writer, and this makes me really interested in reading the Ant-Man series that he did after Superior Foes of Spider-Man. I have not read a single page of the Ant-Man series, and I haven't heard anyone really talk about it. I have heard that it is tonally a little bit similar to Superior Foes, which is what makes me interested in reading it. And later this year, in March, I think, there is going to be a complete collection of the Ant-Man series by him, and I do not remember the name of his artistic collaborator on that book, but I'm very interested in reading that. I want to read that, even though Ant-Man is not a character that I've ever really followed or cared about. I don't think I've read a single issue of Ant-Man other than a couple of his earliest issues from the 60s, but I'm very much interested in reading this if it is anything like Superior Foes of Spider-Man. So if you haven't checked out Superior Foes yet, go ahead and do that. Even if you're not a Spider-Man fan. I don't really read a lot of Spider-Man stuff, but I really like Superior Foes of Spider-Man. I thought it was absolutely great. One of the better series out there that I've read. So another book that I read last week, speaking of Spider-Man, was Silk, Volume 0, The Life and Times of Cindy Moon. I think that's the name of the volume. And here's the thing. I really like the character of Cindy Moon. I really like this book. I like that this book makes Cindy feel like a real person. She has real problems. That is a hallmark of Marvel Comics, going all the way back to 1961 at the earliest, where characters felt like actual characters with problems, and they just happened to be superheroes who had these problems. That is entirely what Cindy Moon is, what the character of Silk is. Here is what I don't like. I don't like the premise that introduces her into into the Marvel Universe. I think a lot of that is exceedingly dumb, but I'm willing to get past some of that because the character feels so real and I'm so engaged with the character. So what is it about this that I think is kind of dumb? The idea that she was bitten by the same spider that bit Peter Parker when he became Spider-Man, I think that's just kind of stupid and silly. And then apparently Ezekiel, who was a big part of J. Michael Straczynski's Spider-Man run like 15, 16 years ago, he shows up at her doorstep after she's bitten, and he says, hey, there's this guy named Moreland. He is trying to kill people with spider powers. You need to hide in this bunker where he is not going to be able to sense you and find you and then kill you and your family. And then she does that. She's hidden in the bunker for 10 years, which, a quick little fanboy nitpick, I think the Marvel Universe is a little older than 10 years. Like, if you take everything that's happened in the Marvel Universe from the Fantastic Four going up in their spaceship all the way to the present day, I would think it'd be about 15 years. I wouldn't think that it would be as short as 10 years, but whatever. I'm not a writer at Marvel. What do I know? But anyway, she was hidden in this bunker for that entire time, and then Peter freed her, and then apparently that led to the Spider-Verse crossover, and now she's in the present day. She's a woman out of time, kind of like Captain America. She feels very out of place in the modern world. She doesn't know what Twitter is. She thinks that Pokemon is still a thing, which I guess technically it was when the series came out because of Pokemon Go. But anyway, she feels very out of place. She's trying to find her family. She doesn't know where they are. All that is really great. I just think that the idea of her being bitten by the spider, the same spider that bit Peter, I think that's silly, but I can get past that. But then apparently Ezekiel comes to her and says she needs to hide or else Moreland is going to find her. Okay, then why didn't Moreland find Spider-Man for like the 10 years that he was being Spider-Man? Why did it take Moreland that long to find Spider-Man? Why hasn't Moreland gone after people like Jessica Drew or Julia Carpenter or Aranya? You remember Aranya, the Heart of the Spider? Why didn't he go after any of these characters? Why is Ezekiel going after Cindy Moon and saying that she, and only she, has to hide in this bunker? I think that that is a very lazy, very contrived premise to get this series started, and like I said, I'm willing to get past that because I really like this character and I really want to see more of her. I hope that she can actually succeed and be a successful, interesting character that people are interested in reading more about. Marvel has had several female spider characters over the years, and unfortunately, a lot of them, not a lot has been done with them. I would say the most well-known and most successful would be Jessica Drew, who is also my favorite spider character. I really liked her adventures from the 70s and 80s, but unfortunately, you go back and look at those adventures, and she had like 15 status quos in the span of like 30 issues. So it's very clear that they had a name, Spider-Woman, and they didn't really know what to do with that name. And since then, they've been doing that with other characters, Julia Carpenter, Aranya. They don't really know what to do with these characters other than, okay, they have spider powers. And speaking of spider powers, why is it that Cindy Moon was bitten by the exact same spider that bit Peter Parker, but she has different powers? At one point, she's able to make claws come out of her hands. She is able to make organic webbing, which at this point, I don't think that Peter made organic webbing. He still had web shooters. She does have the spider sense. She's faster than Peter. Why is it that she has different powers than Peter does? It seems like the only power she has that's similar to Peter is the spider sense. So why does she have different powers if she was bitten by the exact same spider? This would be different if she was experimented on in a lab or something like that, if she got her powers in a different way than Peter did, but she got her powers in the exact same way. How did she get different? I don't know. It doesn't make any sense. This is one of those things I'm willing to look past it because I do like this character, and I hope that she can stick around for a little while and she doesn't disappear like some of these other characters like Jessica Drew, who I guess is kind of still sort of around, but mostly she just shows up in Avengers books, or Julia Carpenter. I have no idea what happened to her, or Maddie Franklin. There's another one from the late 90s. I don't think we've seen her in like 16 years. But anyway, I like Cindy Moon. I actually prefer her older costume that she had that was all webbing. I actually like that one better than the costume she has here, but I must have been the only one who liked that costume. But anyway, I like this series, and I do want to see more of what goes on here. And apparently this ended right when Secret Wars was starting, and then she got a new series after Secret Wars. I haven't read any of that, but I am interested in reading more about this character. So another book that I read last week was the Fantastic Four 1602 miniseries and 1602 A New World. Both of these were sequels to the main 1602 book written by Neil Gaiman and drawn by one of the Kubert brothers. I cannot remember which one of the Kubert brothers it was, and unfortunately, I did not like either of these stories. I don't think that either one of them are very good at all. A New World is okay. It kind of takes where the series left off at the end of the main 1602 book and kind of tries to build a story around that, except that it immediately is ignoring stuff from the original miniseries. At the end of the miniseries, I kind of took it to mean that Professor Xavier and Magneto, or rather the 1602 versions of those characters, that they were going to try and build a new world for mutants in the New World, or America. That was kind of what was hinted at there, and then in this miniseries, in the first issue, they mentioned that the witch breed, or the mutants, that they have fled. We have no idea where they went, but they are not mentioned again in this miniseries. I guess because the people who were doing this, they were more interested in doing a story about Spider-Man than they were about all the other characters of the 1602 world. And basically this is a Spider-Man story. You have Virginia Dare, who here, I kind of get the feeling that she's supposed to be kind of like Gwen Stacy, and I didn't really get that feeling in the main 1602 book, but her father is the governor. He is a member of authority, and he knows that Peter has powers, kind of like how George Stacy was a cop, and he knew that Peter was Spider-Man. I'm kind of getting a Gwen Stacy vibe here from Virginia Dare, but you've also got Osborn, you've got J. Jonah Jameson. The only non-Spider-Man characters that you have here are Lord Iron, who is Iron Man, and he was, as far as I can remember, one of the only Silver Age characters from Marvel who did not feature in the main 1602 book. He's here, and he is hunting down Banner, who he works for King James, and he was sent to the New World to kill Nick Fury, who at the end of the main 1602 book, Nick Fury and Rajaz, they disappeared into a time portal, so Banner is not able to kill Nick Fury, so he's on the run, and then he's trying to atone for some of the stuff that he's done, and that's connected to Lord Iron. And I think my biggest problem with this miniseries is that it feels so much smaller than the events of the main miniseries. The main miniseries felt like an epic. It was a global spanning story. There were a bunch of characters, like 20 or more characters in it. It really felt epic, and this story feels so much smaller, and as a result, I feel like I just don't care about it as much. And also, the story itself just feels a little bit preachy. You've got characters who are Native Americans, and they're going to wipe out all of the white people because in the future, white people are going to do the same thing to the Native Americans. It all just feels very preachy, and I can't help but feel like I can't really root for any of the characters in this book because they've all done some pretty horrible stuff, except for Spider-Man himself. This book is not well written. The art is not great either. I really did not like the depictions of any of these characters. At one point, Virginia Dare, it seems like her arc is that she does not want to use her abilities anymore because she can't control her abilities, and then that's completely abandoned. You've got David Banner, who in the first issue basically becomes at peace with the Hulk, sort of, and then by the end of the miniseries, it seems like he's abandoned that and that he's no longer at peace with who he was, and then at the end, it's like, okay, now he's found a new mission. That was all done very sloppily. You've got this rivalry between him and Lord Iron. That could have been the most interesting part of this miniseries, and then that's kind of dealt with very quickly and very sloppily, I might add, in the last issue. That miniseries, unfortunately, was not very good. I really think that if they wanted to do a sequel to 1602, they should have used some of the other characters from the main event, and they should have had this be a bigger story. Instead of just a 5-issue miniseries, they should have had it be at least 8 issues long, which is how long the original miniseries was, I think. So it should have at least been that long so that they could have dealt with more of the characters and events from the previous miniseries. And then also in this volume is collected the 5-issue Fantastic Four miniseries from the 1602 universe. And that one is not much better. It's written by Peter David, who I'm hit or miss with Peter David. In this case, this story is okay. I think I like it a little bit better than the New World miniseries. It is about Dr. Doom in the events of the main 1602 miniseries. His face got scratched up real bad, so he wants to go to this legendary city that is on the edge of the world, and the world is flat in this universe because of course it is. And Dr. Doom, he basically kidnaps William Shakespeare so that the Fantastic Four will try and rescue William Shakespeare so that they can all go to the edge of the world so that Dr. Doom can get his face fixed up. It doesn't make any sense. I don't know why he wants the Fantastic Four there so that he can go to the edge of the world unless he just wants to kill them, in which case, why couldn't you have just done that separately? Why do you need them to go with you on this voyage? And then once they get there, you've got Namor, and then there is a prophecy introduced in the last issue. This was probably one of the worst written things I've ever read. Namor gets scratched, and then his blood falls on the ground, and then like an earthquake starts happening, and he says, "The prophecy, what have you done? The prophecy." The prophecy says that if royal blood is spilled, then this entire city is going to explode into a bazillion pieces. And that is the first time that this prophecy is ever mentioned. This prophecy is introduced as it is being fulfilled. That is some sloppy writing right there, and that comes from Peter David, who is much better than this. Even whenever I don't like Peter David's writing, he is better than this. I think this feels like he must have been on opiates whenever he was writing this. This was just really badly written. Human Torch kidnaps a woman, and we're meant to think that that's funny. It's really not funny. And then she has this ongoing repertoire with William Shakespeare, which the first couple of times that they interact with each other, it's kind of funny, and then they do it like 6 more times and it stops being funny. Then you've got this ongoing, somewhat antagonistic relationship between Reed and Sue, where Reed doesn't seem to believe in God, and Sue has a big problem with that, which that seems like something she would have already known, that he doesn't believe in God. I don't know why she would just now be finding out about that, and so she doesn't really know if she wants to marry Reed, but then they kind of come to an understanding by the end of the book. Ben, he's good here. He acts like the Thing. He doesn't really have much to do in this miniseries. Unfortunately, this wasn't very well handled, and this makes me wish that these miniseries had been handed off to creators who had more of an interest in the original miniseries, and they could have taken these characters and these properties off in interesting directions so that maybe we could have gotten some more sequels to this series. And the art in this one also, I didn't really care for it. So unfortunately, this book that collects the Fantastic Four miniseries and the New World miniseries, I would not recommend that. I don't think that it's worth it on either side of things. So if you're a fan of the 1602 world, just go ahead and skip this book. And then also, I read some Captain America stuff last week. First, I read the first Mark Waid run on Captain America. This was about 12 or 16 issues right before the big Onslaught stuff that was going on in the mid to late 90s. I believe this book was 1995 and 1996. This is one of the Epic collections, one of the first ones that I've ever read. I was able to get this one pretty cheap. My big reason that I don't like the Epic collections is that for them to exist, the Essential books had to stop existing. And I know there are people out there who hate the Essential books with a burning passion, and if you mention that you like the Essential books, they will come and they will split you from mouth to genitals, and they will just kill your entire family for saying that you like the Essential books. I actually like the Essential books. Yes, they're in black and white. A lot of people don't like that because they prefer superhero comics to be in color. I like the Essential books because you have a whole lot of bang for your buck, like 500 pages for less than $20, and also it's a best way to get into an entire series. If you want to read all of Chris Claremont's X-Men series, you can do that with the Essential books. You can't do that in any other way, unless, I guess, Marvel Unlimited maybe, except that I don't have Marvel Unlimited. Just excuse me for a minute, I'm going to take a drink. I don't have Marvel Unlimited, so I don't know if you can read all Chris Claremont's X-Men run on a digital, stuff like that, but in my opinion, the best way to get into any series is through the Essentials, and unfortunately, we haven't had an Essential book printed since, I think, 2014. I think that's right around the time when they started doing these Epic books. My problem with the Epic books, yes, they are in color, and so for anyone who hated the Essential books for that, there you go, you've won, congratulations, but they're more expensive and you get less bang for your buck. In this case, you only get 16 issues in this Captain America book, whereas with the Essentials, you would get anywhere from 20 to 25 issues. So I don't think that this is as good of a deal, but in this case I was able to get this one used and I was able to get it greatly discounted, so that's not an issue in this case. But anyway, this is written by Mark Waid with art by Ron Garney. Ron Garney I know from he briefly worked with Joe Casey on his Uncanny X-Men run in the early 2000s, and this is some of his earlier work, but according to some of the extra features in this book, he was actually doing work as far back as like in the late 80s, so I haven't actually read any of his earlier work than this, but I really like what he's doing here. In a lot of ways, it reminds me of what he was doing on Uncanny X-Men in the early 2000s, and I think that he also did a Hulk storyline with John Byrne as the writer, also in the early 2000s. And other than those two, I don't know what all else Ron Garney has done, but I really like his work here. I think he's a very solid artist. I like this book quite a bit. This brings back Sharon Carter, who, as far as I know, was killed sometime in the 1970s. And then here we find out, no, her death was actually faked by S.H.I.E.L.D. We don't know why her death was faked. And apparently, Nick Fury didn't even know that her death was faked. As far as he knew, she was still dead, because at one point in this book, we get one of Nick Fury's files where he's kind of doing a brief summary on a character who's been around for a while. For example, in this book, we get to see his take on Captain America. And at one point, he mentions that Sharon Carter is dead. If this was Nick Fury's personal files that were logged in at S.H.I.E.L.D., he wouldn't be pretending like Sharon Carter was dead if he actually knew that she was alive. So I'm pretty sure that Nick Fury thought that she was dead, even though he is the director of S.H.I.E.L.D. But anyway, S.H.I.E.L.D. Faked her death, and then they sent her out to do some dirty work somewhere overseas, and then they cut ties with her, and she was captured by an Asian terrorist somewhere in a fictional country, and then she was held prisoner for a little while. She escapes, and then she allies herself with the Red Skull, and then they save Captain America's life because he was dying of blood poisoning, basically, and then they have to stop some neo-Nazis from using the Cosmic Cube, and Sharon Carter is an absolute horrible person in this book. Apparently, she didn't have much of a personality whenever she was a character in the 60s and 70s, and that makes a lot of sense to me because in the 60s anyway, Stan Lee and all of his artistic collaborators, they didn't really give a lot of personality to any of the female characters. You look at characters like Sue Storm, Betty Banner, or Betty Ross, I should say, Jean Grey, I'm trying to think of some others, Janet Van Dyne. All these characters pretty much acted and behaved in the same way. They didn't really have their own unique personalities. If you look at a Silver Age issue of the X-Men, Beast is the smart one, Iceman is the immature one, Warren is kind of the snobby one, Scott, he's the quiet, timid one, and Jean is the girl. So Sharon Carter is kind of a victim of that. She didn't really have her own personality other than being a woman, and then they killed her off, and then I guess Mark Waid thought that he needed to give her some kind of personality when he brought her back, so he gave her this incredibly abrasive, really mean-spirited personality where she is constantly yelling at Steve, and he doesn't really deserve it. At first, it seems like maybe she's upset because he didn't know that she was still alive, or maybe she thinks that he did know she was still alive and he just didn't go after her, because at one point when he says, I thought you were dead, she's kind of acting surprised. She's like, oh, you did? Okay. And that's really weird that she thought that he thought that she was still alive and he wouldn't go after her, because out of everyone in the Marvel Universe, Steve is the one person who would have risked everything to go after her if he thought that she was still alive. So I don't understand her behavior here. I get that she would be hardened and she would be very abrasive, and her outlook on life would change after being held prisoner and being betrayed by S.H.I.E.L.D., which was like her life and the one thing that she held on to. And so being betrayed by S.H.I.E.L.D., I get that her outlook on life would change, but I don't think that she needed to be as rude and mean to Steve as she is here. At one point, she'd given him mouth to mouth, and then he wakes up, and then they continue kissing, and then she punches him, and then she says, there was no spark, I didn't feel anything. And I'm thinking, that's not Steve's fault. That's your fault for being cold and emotionless. So anyway, I do not like Sharon Carter here. I think that she is just an awful person in this book, and it's never actually revealed why S.H.I.E.L.D. cut ties with her and left her out in the middle of nowhere. I've been recently watching the TV show Burn Notice, and this is kind of reminding me of Burn Notice. Like, there's one panel here where she says something like they cut her off and weren't telling her why they did that. And I was thinking, this is exactly like Burn Notice. The only difference is they don't actually use the word, you've been burned, we got a burn notice on you. So anyway, I do wish that they could have explained why they burned her. Maybe they do in a later run, although I doubt it, because this leads into the Heroes Reborn stuff, which was in an alternate reality where the Avengers and the Fantastic Four did not have memories of their time in the Marvel Universe, and so I don't think that they ever followed up on this, or if they did, it would have been after these characters returned to the Marvel Universe a few years later. But anyway, I like this volume quite a bit. I like Mark Waid's take on some of these characters. It's bold and it's different. This was coming off of like a 9-year run from Mark Gruenwald, and we actually get to see a few interviews with Mark Gruenwald in some of the extra features here. And that, I'm not going to lie, that hit me in an emotional spot. I didn't cry or anything like that, but Mark Gruenwald actually died of a heart attack in 1996, and he is probably best known for the Squadron Supreme. He did a 12-issue series featuring those characters in 85, I think, and also he's very well known for his 9-year run on this character, but Captain America. But he died shortly after leaving Captain America and Mark Waid coming on the book, but this was these interviews were conducted just a few months before he died, and so getting to see him in these interviews talking about how he had plans to do other characters, that was a little bit emotional. It was kind of hitting me. And then I was talking about how when he first started Captain America, his daughter was just born, and then whenever he was leaving the book, his daughter was 9 years old, and I was thinking, oh, guys, don't tell me that, because that means that she would have been about 9 or 10 whenever he died, and that just really hit me in a place. For some reason, if you have someone like Carrie Fisher, who died about 2 years ago, tail end of 2016, I can watch Star Wars The Last Jedi, and it doesn't hit me in an emotional spot, even though I know that Carrie Fisher is no longer with us and we won't get anything else from her. For some reason, that doesn't bother me. But then, if I read an interview like this with Mark Gruenwald, or I listen to a commentary with Dwayne McDuffie or Darwin Cook, for some reason, hearing them actually talk in real life, for some reason, that gets me more than if I was reading a comic from Dwayne McDuffie, or reading a Mark Gruenwald comic, or a Darwin Cook comic. For some reason, just hearing them talk in real life and getting to see them in an interview talking about stuff like that, that gets me more, and I don't know why. I'm way off topic here, but anyway, I like this book. If you like Captain America, you'll probably like it also. We get to see the typical James Bond story that feels like it's a typical landmark of James Bond, where Captain America is exiled from America. He has to go and live in France, and he has to try and clear his name, and he's going around punching American generals. He's working with the Red Skull. He's a rogue agent. That's cool. You don't get to see Steve do that a whole lot. And then we get to see him team up with Thor and Tony, and we apparently find out that Captain America is the most normal one of the Marvel Trinity at this point. Tony has been replaced by his time-traveling teenage self, and apparently this was a development that everybody hated, and I don't understand that, because it's exactly the same thing as what Brian Michael Bendis did with the all-new X-Men just a few years ago, where he brought the teenage X-Men into the present day and was letting them do adventures here in the present-day Marvel Universe. That's exactly what they did with Tony Stark, where somehow they killed off adult Tony Stark. I don't know the circumstances behind it, and then somehow teenage Tony Stark is brought into the present day, and now he's having adventures where he's trying to enroll in college and have a life, and we get to see that a little bit in this book. I don't know why people didn't like it when they did it with Iron Man, but then they fell for it hook, line, and sinker whenever Bendis did it with the X-Men. Personally, I did not like Bendis doing that with the X-Men, but I'm one of those weird people. I don't really like the Silver Age X-Men, so I didn't really like seeing them in the Marvel Universe in the present day. I don't know why people didn't like that with Tony Stark, and I'm not going to talk about that much because this is not an Iron Man book. But also, Thor, we find out that he is no longer a god. He does not have the powers of a god anymore, and he's sleeping with the Enchantress, and that's something that Steve was extremely surprised about. So both Thor and Iron Man, they've got a lot of stuff going on in their lives right now. Steve, apparently being kicked out of America and being told that he could no longer be Captain America, was still the most recognizable and the least changed of these three. Of course, by this point, he was back to being Captain America. But this was weird because it was playing it like these three were finally going to be part of the Avengers again, and then like immediately after this happens, Steve has to go undercover on a mission with Sharon Carter once again. So it's a little weird where immediately, actually, I don't remember the events. I think it was Red Skull team-up story, and then Steve is kicked out of the country, and then he comes back, and then we get a story where he teams up with Thor and Iron Man and the Avengers, and then I think we get another story where he goes and he does something else, and I can't remember what the other story was. But anyway, this is a pretty good book. I liked it. It's a little dated at times, especially some of the extra features. I remember reading some of these Marvel comics from the 90s and getting to see interviews like that, and just the way these comics looks, just the aesthetic of it looks very dated. It looks like it comes from the mid-90s, and I don't mind. I really like getting to see some of that. It kind of brings back fond memories of reading some of these comics. Even though I didn't start reading comics until like 2001, I would hunt down back issues like this, and I would read stuff from the mid-90s, and it reminds me of those days when I would do that. So anyway, if you like Captain America, I recommend this book. If you've never read any Captain America, but you want to try out a Captain America book, I would recommend this book also. I think that it's a pretty good start to getting your feet wet with Captain America. And then the other Captain America book, actually I read a couple more Captain America books. One of them was the first 16 issues of the Marvel Knights Captain America series, which was written by a few different people. Chuck Austin, John Nyland, I think it's his name, with art by John Cassaday, Jay Lee, and there was one other guy, I can't remember his name. I know that he was one of the artists who worked on the Ultimate Galactus trilogy, and for the life of me, I cannot remember his name. I'll put it here on the screen. I apologize. Anyway, the basic premise of this book, it starts off with Captain America kind of reacting to 9/11. Just one second. We start off with Captain America reacting to 9/11, where he's going after these terrorists, and then he finds out that S.H.I.E.L.D., they have some of the same weapons that these terrorists have, and it seems like S.H.I.E.L.D. has got their hands dirty. They weren't actually responsible for 9/11, but it seems like they are at least somewhat culpable. It's a little confusing how it happens. Basically, it seems that S.H.I.E.L.D. has these weapons, and they got these weapons from this company, and the company got the weapons from the guy who is leading the terrorists. So it's not like S.H.I.E.L.D. was buying weapons from terrorists, but it's possible that they knew where the weapons came from. It's not really made clear. But anyway, at the end of that first storyline, Captain America actually unmasks on TV and basically says, America did not kill this guy, an American killed this guy. He's making a distinction about that, and then his superiors in S.H.I.E.L.D., they make a really huge deal about how now his secret identity is blown and he's useless to them as a tool. And I thought that was pretty bold. I didn't realize that Captain America had a secret identity for the first basically 40 years of him being in the main Marvel Universe. I didn't realize he had a secret identity for that long, because he's one of those characters I don't think really needs a secret identity. In that Epic collection, the one collecting the Mark Waid, Ron Garney stuff, at one point it talks about some of the other jobs that Steve had. At one point he went undercover as a cop. At one point, while he was being a full-time superhero, he was also a full-time artist at Marvel Comics, drawing the adventures of Captain America, and that's ridiculous because any comic book artist will tell you that they do not have time to draw a 22-page monthly comic book and also be a superhero. So no, that's just really silly. But Captain America is one of those guys who doesn't really need a secret identity, I don't think. Personally, I don't like in this day and age, in our post-Iron Man the movie age, where absolutely no superhero has a secret identity. I think that's taking it too far, but I think Captain America doesn't need one. So I think that this was a very bold move of having Captain America basically say, no more secret identity now, I'm Steve Rogers. But anyway, this series starts off pretty interesting and kind of good, where Captain America is having to confront the fact that his country is not 100% pure. It does not stand for the same ideals that he stands for, and they are into some corrupt stuff, and he has to confront that, and I like that. I like that Captain America is put in a no-win situation. In that Epic collection, the Mark Waid, Ron Garney stuff, Mark Waid and Mark Gruenwald both were talking about how Captain America can never lose. They were more talking about him being in a fight with somebody he can never lose, but also I think you could take that to mean they were saying that morally Captain America cannot lose. And I don't think that that's true. I think that Captain America should often lose. I think you should put him in difficult situations where he has to look at what's going on and he has to realize that it's not 1940 anymore. I think that that is what makes some of these dilemmas that he's in very interesting. I need to look and see how much time I have left. I think that I'm good for now. I got a few more minutes left, but I do need to hurry. But anyway, this Marvel Knights series, it starts off very interesting, where he is trying to confront some of this stuff, and then it just gets progressively sillier and progressively dumber as the book continues. Eventually, we have this guy who is a Native American, and he is trying to kill all the white people in the country because apparently they are all responsible for what happened 200 years ago when all the Native Americans were killed off, and he has bonded to a Native American storm god, and there are clones of Bucky Barnes and clones of Steve Rogers here, and then here this guy tells Steve that him being frozen in ice, that the government was actually responsible for that, and then in the next storyline we actually find out that that's apparently true. That is a retcon that I think is incredibly dumb. I do not like this idea that that the government was involved with it. I think that that story in Avengers issue 4, that it was fine the way it was. We find out that Namor was kind of involved in unfreezing him, but it didn't happen the way that we were told in Avengers issue 4. And then we find out that the Red Skull, or actually there's this guy who works for the Secretary of Defense. His name is Del Rusk, and that's the Red Skull using an alias and not a very good alias. And apparently that was something that was going on in the Avengers books at this time. He has hired this guy who has an alien hand to try and see what will make Captain America break, what will make him finally decide to kill somebody, which Captain America was a soldier. He killed a lot of people. Don't let anyone tell you that Captain America never killed anyone, because he was a soldier. He fought in World War II. He killed people. I think this idea that he never kills anyone and that he will not kill anyone, and this guy trying to decide what will make him hit that breaking point, that's just all really dumb. And then somehow this guy also confirms that Captain America was frozen by the U.S. government, and then this separate bad guy who has nothing to do with Del Rusk or this guy with the alien hand, he's also telling Steve that he was frozen by the U.S. government. This series started off really good. I really liked the direction it was going, and then it just takes a nosedive almost immediately, starting with the second arc. I would not recommend reading this book. Apparently, the Marvel Knights Captain America series lasted for like 30-something issues, and this was only half of it. I am not going to be getting Volume 2 because Volume 1 was kind of a train wreck. I thought this was going to be good. I had heard some really good things about Captain America dealing with 9/11. I was really interested in that, and then after that, it just stops being good. It's just a train wreck, like I said. So I read a couple more Captain America books. One of them was Captain America Fighting Avenger, I think is what it was called. And it is not technically a canonical Marvel Comics book. It is set in the Marvel Adventures canon, which was from about mid-2000s, I think, where basically we were sort of retelling different stories in the Marvel Universe. I remember one issue of Spider-Man Adventures that was, apparently that series was just literally retelling issues of the Stan Lee, Steve Ditko stuff, but slightly updating it, and it was for kids. But some of these issues, like the Avengers and the Captain America stuff, it's new adventures, but aimed at children. And it's a digest-sized book. It's not a full-size comic book. And if you like all-ages books, I would recommend it. It's a fun little book. It's got 4 unrelated stories. One of the issues, actually the one that feels the most out of place here, is one where Captain America teams up with the Rhino to save a baby rhinoceros from Hydra. I thought that was a fun little issue. We have a story here where Captain America, it's on his first military mission. I like that one quite a bit. That was actually the main issue of this book. And then we get to see Captain America be kidnapped by Baron Helmut Zemo, and the Avengers have to go and rescue him. That one is a tie between World War II and the present day, so it's kind of thematically resonant here. That's not the word I'm looking for. It's thematically I don't know. Anyway, it fits here, but the problem is Captain America doesn't do a whole lot in that issue. It's mostly the Avengers doing all the action stuff, so that issue probably didn't need to be here in a Captain America book. And then we have one where some of the invaders are brought into the present day to team up with Captain America, sort of, and they're being controlled by the Puppet Master, and then Captain America has an opportunity to go back to the past, and then he has to decide, am I going to do that or not? And then once again, Captain America doesn't really do a whole lot in that issue. It's more Wolverine who has the character arc in that issue. So that book, it's okay. If you have a child who wants to read Captain America comics, he can enjoy that. The first issue, the one of Captain America on his first military mission, I think that's the best one of the bunch. But other than that, the rest of the issues are okay. I like the Rhino issue, but it was not, I guess it didn't fit in with the other books that had more to do with Captain America in World War II. How much time do I got? I really need to hurry. 5 minutes. Okay, the last Captain America book that I read was called Forever Allies, and that is from around the time when Bucky Barnes was filling in for Steve Rogers. I believe Steve was dead at this time, so Bucky was the new Captain America, and this basically addresses Bucky's non-superhero allies during World War II, the Young Allies. They were basically like the Newsboy Legion or something like that, a bunch of kids who helped fight crime during the war effort, and we find out that the Young Allies comic book series that existed in the real world and also existed in the Marvel Universe, that was a series of fictionalized adventures of the Young Allies, and they were actually exaggerated a little bit, and they were made into racial caricatures in one case, and that these characters were actually not quite that goofy in the actual Marvel Universe. And we get to see a 4-issue miniseries where we're jumping back and forth between Bucky Bucky in 1940s with the Young Allies fighting the Lotus Lady, and then in the present day where he, as Captain America, is fighting her, and that's a pretty good miniseries. It's got some Nick Dragata artwork, and I really love his art a lot. And then there was a one-shot where we got to see Bucky meeting up with the guys who are still alive in the present day, and that was a really good issue. And then we had an actual issue of Young Allies from the 1940s, which is one of the most racist comics that I've ever read. There is a black guy who is a character in it, and do not read that comic. If you buy the trade paperback or the hardcover for Forever Allies, just skip that Young Allies issue at the end of the book. It's bad. There is nothing redeeming about it. Like I said, one of the most racist things I've ever read. I cannot believe that that is something that they got away with in the 40s. Even in the 40s, 20 years before civil rights, I'm surprised that they were this racist. Like, wow, it was bad. But anyway, the rest of the book is really good. The rest of the book is not that bad. It actually treats these characters as actual characters. So anyway, I am running out of time here. I spent a lot more time talking about these books than I usually do. So anyway, that's all that I have for what I read last week. I will see you guys later in the week, and this time next week I'll be talking about what I read this week. So anyway, you guys have a great day. Catch you later.